5 weeks, 5 weeks, I think. Proverbs is, it's a great book, filled with wisdom, comes from God, and intensely practical in every aspect. And so I have a couple of texts from Proverbs and then one from the New Testament I'll read. It's just kind of a reminder of one that we read not that long ago and preached on. But first, Proverbs 18:13. Don't look at what the bulletin says. Bulletins are suggestions. We don't follow them carefully. Obviously. But Proverbs 18:13, which says, to answer before listening, that is folly and shame. And Proverbs 29:20 in the New Living Translation reads this way, there is more hope for a fool than for someone who speaks without thinking. James 1:19 in the New Testament, text we looked at a few months back, says something similar. He says, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. The lost art of listening. I'm going to play for you just a short little clip, and hopefully everything will work correctly.
I'm not hungry.
What's wrong, sweetheart?
I miss Daddy.
I know. We all miss him.
I miss him more.
Oh, no, I miss him the
I
most.
miss him a lot.
No,
I
miss him
more.
so much.
Hey, everyone shut up. This filter makes me look like a cat. This is so funny, it's making me cry.
So did you get it? There's a new ad campaign that's coming out. Will Ferrell's, the comedian, is kind of the spearhead of this thing. And there's just a whole series of little ads that are designed to remind us that sometimes we get so consumed with our devices, our cell phones and our computers and our tablets and our TVs and all that, that we forget to take the time to talk to each other. And we sit at tables together all looking at our phones. And we do this. I do this. I catch myself all the time doing this. And so there's a campaign to try to remind all of us that we need to set down our cell phones and stop our Twitter and our Facebook now and then so that we can have a face-to-face conversation and really communicate at a deep level. Now, when I say this, I want you to know that I am no opponent to social media, okay? I can attest that I have 825 Facebook friends, and I have 2,327 followers on Twitter as of this morning. I have 302 connections on LinkedIn. I just tell you that just to know that you know that I do this stuff. But nonetheless, I think it's important for us once in a while to realize that technology, while it's a wonderful tool, is a horrible master. And it often keeps us from what God would have us do. One expert in listening, and there's an expert in everything these days. You ever notice that? In other words, he wrote a book. He did some studies and he wrote a book. But in any case, what he writes is actually pretty interesting. He says this: we are losing our listening. Our society is losing our listening. And he goes on to explain what he means by that this world that we live in is filled with noise and complexity. In our lives, there's little margin, we just run from here to there to everywhere. And on top of all that, the complexity of life and all that happens and the noisiness of life, we have all these devices that are supposed to make our life simpler, but often complicate our lives more than we realize. And he says, we've lost the ability to really listen. And he says even the art of conversation is being replaced by what he calls personal broadcasting. And let me explain to you what he means by that, because this is a good point. On social media, what do? Are we having a conversation? Not really. We're talking, we're broadcasting to everybody about what we're doing. Oh, look at what I had for dinner tonight. You know, I'm standing here by the Grand Canyon. You know, I'm having a birthday party. We're announcing to the world, or everybody who would be willing to listen, what we're doing or what we're thinking, or, you know, what our little latest political rant is or something. Which probably are not all that welcome anyway. But nonetheless, we do these things. A long time ago, Ernest Hemingway said this: when people talk, listen completely. Most people never listen. Isn't that true? Facebook. I saw this on Facebook and I thought it was great. I'm trying to make friends outside of Facebook while applying the same principles. So every day I walk down the street and tell passerbys what I have eaten and how I feel at the moment and what I've done the night before and what I will do later and with whom. I would give them pictures of my family, my dog, my gardening, taking things apart in the garage, watering the lawn, standing in front of landmarks, driving around town, having lunch, and doing what anybody and everybody does every day. I also listen to their conversations and I give them a thumbs up. And I tell them I like them. And it works just like Facebook. I already have 4 people following me. 2 police officers, a private investigator, and a psychiatrist. What do you think about it? Well, it is kind of funny when you think about it. But we do this. And I don't want to totally demean it, because it is a wonderful thing that we're able to connect with people that we otherwise wouldn't connect. I mean, I have friends on Facebook that I went to elementary school with, and high school, and every college that I attended, and graduate school, and every church that I've ever been a part of. I have connections with people, and I'm reminded of their birthdays, and I'm reminded of things that are going on in their lives, and out of surface level, it's a wonderful thing, it's a good thing. But it can become too consuming in our lives, and it takes too much time away from real conversation. Well, it seems to me the Proverbs have some things to speak to our age. The ability to listen is so important. Think about this for a minute. Your relationship with God requires listening. Your relationship with others in the body of Christ requires listening. Fellowship is, in large part, communication, which in large part is learning to listen to people. Even when they're telling you something you're probably not all that interested in, even when we're making small talk from time to time. But being interested and legitimately caring for another person requires taking the time to listen to them. If you want to share your faith with someone, you better learn to listen. Because if all you do is talk, you haven't earned the right to speak. Your marriage, it depends on communication. And even more than that, it depends on learning to listen, which is the hard part of communication. Everybody can talk. You know, that's the easy part. But listening, that's tough. Especially when there's history between the two of you. It can be difficult sometimes to talk. But your marriage depends on it. If you're going to know and understand your spouse, if you're going to express fondness, appreciation, and love to them, if you're going to resolve conflict, if you're going to have shared meaning and purpose in life, if you're going to work together in partnership to do something greater than what you do by yourself, which it seems to me marriage ought to help you do, and on and on and on and on, you're going to have to learn how to communicate. And that means you're going to have to learn how to listen. Your family requires communication. And at its heart, it requires learning how to listen. So, we turn to Proverbs. What does Proverbs tell us? Proverbs 20:12, it tells us, ears that hear and eyes that see, the Lord has made them both. And note that you have 2 ears and only 1 mouth. That should tell you something. Let me think about it. Proverbs 1:5. Let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance. As you move through the book of Proverbs, one of the most important words that is repeated over and over and over again is this one. Listen. Listen. Listen to wisdom. Listen to God. Listen to other wise people. But learn how to listen. And involved in that, in the Hebrew way of thinking, to hear is to act on what you're hearing. It's not just to store it away, but to act upon it. When God calls you to hear, He expects you to obey. They go together. They're the Shema of the Old Testament, the most basic thing that every little kid was taught in Judaism. Hear, O Israel. Hear, that's where Shema, the word for hear. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart and soul and mind. That expression of your relationship with God. At its heart, what is the relationship that Israel was to have with God? To hear Him. To listen in such a way as to respond and obey Him. It's at the heart of what our relationship with God is all about. There are at least 23 verses that I could find that specifically use the term for listening or hearing from God. And sometimes they use them more than once in that same verse. And there are other ones that probably, even though they don't use the word, at least imply listening. So at the heart of Proverbs is this idea that we need to be a people who know how to listen. And it goes farther than that. It tells us in Proverbs 18:13 that he who answers before listening, that is his folly and his shame. That is his folly and his shame. And later I'll be testing you on the Hebrew text that's underneath that, but no, not really. Make sure you read it backwards. It starts over here and goes across. Of course, it's fun stuff. I love biblical languages. But look at what he says here. He who answers before listening. So, as one translation, New Living says, spouting off before listening to the facts is both shameful and foolish. I got a couple of translations here to kind of give you the nuances. Answering before listening is both stupid and rude. Those who answer before they listen are both foolish and disgraceful. It's stupid and embarrassing to give an answer before you listen. Now, this is not true. This is something we all know at the heart. And how has it not happened to you? You open mouth, insert foot. It happens all the time. You ever watch Family Feud? I mean, that's what that game is all about, right? They say something stupid. Oh, good answer, good answer. Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. That's Proverbs 18:13. They answer before they really pay attention and listen to what's going on. And we do it in our lives all the time. We feel like what we have to say is so much more important than what you have to say that I'm going to force my opinion on you. I'm not going to listen to you. I am so wise, and I know that there's nothing more that I need to know about this situation. Listening, it's important. He says if we don't learn how to listen, in essence, he says that's folly. Or another way of saying it is, you are a fool. If you don't listen, you're a fool. Now, what does he mean by that? Well, we're going to look at that in a minute. The other thing is it brings shame. And it does. How many times have you stuck your foot in your mouth and said something stupid and it brought you shame? You were like, oh, I shouldn't have said that. That was really dumb. Proverbs 29:20 says, do you see a man who speaks in haste? speaks too quickly but doesn't listen. There's more hope for a fool than for him. Now in this one he goes even a step further. He says, not only are you a fool, but there's even more hope for a fool than you if you talk too soon and don't learn how to listen. More hope for a fool than for someone who speaks without thinking. A fool, Hebrew scholars think it may come from an Arabic word actually, that means thick-headed. Thick-headed. Somebody who's mentally deficient. Somebody who's stupid. You know what we're talking about. But the Hebrews took that basic word and they applied a little bit, an added edge to it. A fool is not just someone who is mentally deficient. A fool is someone who is morally deficient. There's something in the heart of a person who does something that is absolutely wrong. And because there's something wrong in the inside, therefore they act foolishly. This is the way Hebrews looked at it. The Jewish people, in other words. The Hebrew words rendered fool in Proverbs and elsewhere in the Old Testament denote one who is morally deficient, says one lexicon. Such a person is lacking in sense and is generally corrupt. So if I'm not a listener, if I'm always spouting out my own wisdom before listening, if I'm not one who judges carefully before I speak, then I'm not only stupid, there's something morally within me that needs to be changed. The fool identifies himself as soon as he opens his mouth, according to Proverbs 17:28. He would be wise to conceal his folly by keeping quiet. If you keep quiet, nobody knows what a fool you are, see? But when he starts talking without thinking, ruin is at hand, Proverbs 10:14. And while wise men avoid strife, the fool, he quarrels anytime he gets a chance. Proverbs 23. He cannot restrain himself and will display his annoyance at once. Whereas a wise man, he overlooks an insult. Proverbs 12:16. A fool has no balance in his relations with others. The wisdom instructor, the proverb writer, indicates that while stones and sand are most burdensome, a fool's anger is even more intolerable. Much of what the Proverbs focus in on in regards to foolishness, of being a fool, has to do with what we say. Some of it has to do with what we do, and some of it has to do with the attitudes we bring to things, especially in regards to anger, which is very, very closely related to conversation and to communication, which should make us all think a little bit. And the Proverbs, again, say that folly, or being a fool, is both mental and a moral deficiency. We look foolish and stupid, but it also demonstrates a lack of character, according to their way of thinking. A lack of character that brings shame to us. A sense of disgrace, which attends public humiliation. We stick our foot in our mouth, and everybody sees it. Everybody looks at us and says, what a fool that is. Oh, silly. That person, I can't believe they responded that way. Why don't they listen? So the biblical principles here, the ones who answers too quickly, folly, it's shame. There's even more hope for a fool than somebody who speaks too quickly. This is why James told us, be quick to listen and slow to speak and slow to become angry. The same biblical principles, Old Testament and New. So today we want to focus on how do I become a better listener? If it's this important to us, to our relationship with God and to our relationship with each other and to our marriage and to our families, then we ought to learn how to do it, right? Got to see what we can learn about listening. Now let's talk about some things that we do wrong. Common listening mistakes. Daydreaming. I'm in a conversation with someone, an important conversation with someone, and I start thinking about something else. And often they're silly things. They're not even important things, but there's something I know I need to do later in the day, or there's some little task that I've left unfinished. There's just some little thing, and I start thinking about that, and I get consumed by that thing, and pretty soon I'm not paying attention at all. You ever do that? daydreaming. One time when I was a kid in elementary school at a parent-teacher conference, the teacher said that I was daydreaming in class. And I don't think it was true. No, it probably was true. She was kind of a boring teacher. But anyway, even a grocery list can consume our attention while somebody's speaking. Thinking about what to say next. Do we not do this? We are so worried about our response that we seek to listen first. Before you can even think about responding, you need to find out what the person's talking about. But the wheels start to turn. Oh, I've got to have the right answer here. I have to defend myself against what she's saying, or I have to have a word of wisdom for this person because, they'll think I'm silly if I don't know what to say here. And there's all kinds of funny games that we play in our heads that keep us from really listening to each other or judging what the other person is saying. We do that. I can't believe that person said that. We start judging that person. Sometimes we listen with a specific goal in mind. But here's a big one. Distracted by technology. Now, it probably says something about the wisdom of setting aside times to make conversation. If you come, it's Super Bowl Sunday, and your husband is watching the football game, it's the fourth quarter, it's the 2-minute warning, and it's tied, it's not a time for a major conversation. You get it? He's going to be distracted. He can turn it off, but he's going to be thinking about what's going on with that game. And, for me, if it's late at night and I'm getting ready to sleep, not time for me to have a deep conversation. Now, that may not be true for Malou, but it's true for me. And this is always something we have to negotiate. Because I talk in the morning or early part of the day, because that's when I'm there. At night, you start talking to me, I'm going to fall asleep. It's not going to work. Or, if you start talking to me and it's something I start thinking about, I won't be able to sleep the rest of the night because it'll keep turning around in my head. And it's like, I don't want to talk about it now because... So you have to understand each other in the relationship and find times that work for both of you to have those big discussions. There are times when you're distracted. Lay down the phone, turn off the TV at the right time. I mean, not right before the cliffhanger resolves, but you can wait till the commercial break or something. It's okay. So use wisdom and discernment how you do it. But you see, eliminate the distractions because you need as much help as you can to help the other person listen to you. So be wise about that. But don't be distracted by your Twitter, by your Facebook, by your phone, by your text, whatever. Listening skills. People deal with these things. What are some things you can do to learn how to listen better? And one of the suggestions by some of these people is that you should every day take a couple minutes to be just quiet. That's not a bad idea. Even Jesus, when he got up in the morning, went and found a solitary place, a quiet place to pray. There's something about starting the day and finding some quiet time that helps us to focus. And have you ever tried, most of us today are allergic to silence. And I went to George Fox University for a while. It's a Quaker thing. Quakers love silence. They like to sit around in circles and listen. It's incredibly uncomfortable for most of us. But sometimes it's just wonderfully profound to see how God speaks to us in those times. It's also funny how you learn. There's things, I was in the sanctuary and I was thinking about this, and I was sitting here and I noticed that clock ticks. I never hear that clock tick. But I sat here quietly, and I heard that thing was making this loud ticking noise. But I don't normally hear that. It's a principle that we shut off, that we filter out things that we hear all the time. But if we take some time just to be quiet, it's amazing all the things that we're missing out on. Or go for a walk in the woods. One of my favorite things to do is go up to Lake Alpine or up the hill, where it's just quiet, especially this time of year when there's not very many people up there. Hear the bird song, the wind across the trees. There's things, the beautiful things that we miss out on because we rush too fast in the world we live in. As a kid, I used to love to listen to music, and I would try to isolate the different instruments. I put my headphones on. Oh, here's this part, here's the bass part, here's the guitar, here's the keyboard, here's the drums. Oh, did everybody notice today? Yeah. There was something different in our music.
I love it.
The piano got tuned. Listening skills. Paying attention to the mundane. You ever listen to the dryer as it does the waltz? Yeah, it's doing this. There's all kinds of things out there. But the big thing is this: make time for conversation. And one thing that I learned that has helped me immensely in regards to communication is befriend somebody from another culture, especially if they have an accent, and learn to listen. You will develop listening skills. At first it's hard. You won't understand. My boss, before I came here and I was at Horizon Institute, my boss was a Korean guy, and he had an accent that was, oh my goodness. Nobody could understand. Even the Koreans couldn't understand him. And it's true, because he was from a part of the country that was kind of out in the country, and the ones from Seoul thought he talked funny. And he definitely talked English funny. But I had to listen to this guy and interpret for him all the time. And at first it was almost impossible. But as I gained more ability to listen, and listen carefully, and really focus, and I had to really focus, I was eventually able to figure out what he was saying and be able to communicate that to other people. At least half the time. Maybe not all the time. And there's something about conversing with other people where we learn how to pay attention to each other. And it's worth the effort. And we learn so much too because of the cultural differences. So much fun. I can tell you lots of stories. So, how do you listen? Let me give you just a couple of real basic principles of developing listening skills that can apply to your marriage, to your family, to your small group, to your workplace, to just about anything. The first thing I would tell you is listen attentively. And I've kind of made this point already, so I won't belabor it, but eliminate distractions. Set regular, undistracted times to communicate, especially with your spouse or your family members, without distraction. So during those times, eliminate all the TV, the computer, the phones, the iPad, all that stuff. Growing up, I grew up in a family of storytellers. I think that's maybe one of the reasons I enjoy preaching, is that at night, when we came together for the meal, Dad told us stories, Mom told us stories, we told stories, my sister and I told stories. That's what we did. We got around the table and we told stories about what had happened to us that day. And the more we talked, the better the stories got. And I can't guarantee that all of them were completely true because we learned how to tell stories. But nonetheless, we learned what makes a good. How do you do it? And for us, that was such an important part of our family time. Was just around the table talking about what happened during the day, and that's largely lost in many of our households, I think. We run here, we got busy schedules. It's hard to sit down and just talk about the stuff of our day. We've lost the ability to listen. And then in your family, make special time for bonding and communication. The best times with my dad growing up In the winter, it was down in the basement. We had a ping pong table. And it was in the evenings, we would hit the ping pong ball back and forth, sometimes for hours. And you know what? We hardly ever kept score because we were talking. In the spring, or well, mostly in the summer, but even in spring and fall, it was often a football outside or a baseball or something like that. But it was something kind of mundane but fun to do. And we would spend an hour or two or three, and sometimes we just got carried away. And it always led to conversation at a deep level. So what is it that you like to do with your kids? Find time to do it with them. Take some special time with each of them, because you will bond with them and you will communicate with them, and this will not be lost on them in the long run. Take the time to do that. Find something you like to do together. Maybe you like to go hiking. We did a lot of that when I was a kid. And it's where I learned to love hiking, but it's also where I learned to have conversation with members of my own family. Whatever it is you like to do, go out for coffee and sit down and talk. It doesn't matter what it is. But the big thing that we need if we're going to listen better in our society is we need to find margin in our lives. Time. Time. It's hard to find, but it's so desperately important. Back in the, 1990s, I guess it was, there was a book that Richard Swenson wrote called Margin, which I think is one of the most prophetic and applicable books of, and it's even more true today than it was back in the 1990s. He said that we're too busy, and our lifestyle moves too quickly. We have too many choices, and our lifestyle and our society is too complex, and consequently we have no margin in our lives, and our marriages are suffering, and our families are suffering, and our relationships, our neighborhoods are suffering. We don't know our neighbors because we don't have time to just sit down and have a conversation. It's true of finances as well as, time and numerous other things. It's an incredibly insightful book by a doctor who pretty much, he had been teaching at a college in University of Wisconsin, as well as had a full-time practice. And he realized, I don't have any time for life. So what did he do? He gave up his teaching job, and he went to about half of his patients and referred the rest of them. And he said, I could live on that. He sold his car and bought something that was more reasonable. He started to downsize his life so that he had more life to live. It was incredible. Good guy. I've met him on several occasions. Definitely countercultural, but nonetheless something to be said for. So listen attentively. Get rid of all your distractions. Find quality time to just talk. You can do something while you're doing it, but talk. Then listen actively. Listen actively. Listening is not something you can do passively. Not very well. You have to devote your attention to it. A couple principles. Receive. You have to have eye contact. Sometimes couples sit down to talk. I've had this in counseling before. And they can't look at each other. And you know you got a problem. Oh, this one's going to take a while. Because they can't look at each other. But communication takes place as we look at each other, as we give eye contact and attention to each other. We appreciate each other as we're listening. And this is both verbal and nonverbal. You nod your head. You make it clear that you're paying attention to that person. Sometimes, something like that. You acknowledge what's going on. You don't rush in to make your statement, but you keep the conversation going. Attention. Focus on the speaker, not on your thoughts. Not what you're going to say. You'll have time for that later. 4, grace. Don't judge the person as you're talking to them. Don't become defensive. Don't allow them to, but allow them to express their thoughts and their concerns and their feelings. Allow them to express it and to fully express it as best you can without feeling to say, oh, well, there's a reason why I did that. And we're quick to defend, we're quick to shut people down before we really find out what's going on. One of the studies that I was looking at about listening was about doctors and listening. And it was a horrible percentage. I think it was like 60-some or 70-some% of doctors shut people down when they're talking before they get to what the person's problem is, according to this one study, which I thought was fascinating. Because people don't give it to you right away. They want to tell the story, and then eventually they tell you what the real problem is. Sometimes we shut people down too quickly. Summarizing is a good technique in active listening. If I understand you correctly, I think what you're saying is that, is this what you're trying to communicate? Is this what you're thinking? Is this what you're feeling? And if it isn't, don't respond and you'll correct. Asking follow-up questions to clarify and to find out what's going on in that person. You're actively trying to listen. We're not even talking about communicating this week. We'll get to that one another Sunday. But as far as listening, just ask the questions. And embrace silence. Resist the urge to fill the moments with words. Fill moments with silence. Silence is an invitation to reflect, not necessarily to respond. Allow the person to express what's going on. Give them time. Some of us, that drives us crazy, I know. Microwave society, it's hard. But sometimes it takes them a while to get to the point. Give them the space. Just be there with them while they're getting their thoughts together. The real art of conversation is not only to say the right thing at the right place, but to leave unsaid the wrong thing at the tempting moment. So listen, attentively listen, actively listen empathetically. Seek to understand before seeking to be understood. Have empathy for the person. It's not sympathy where you feel sorry for them, but you're relating to what they're feeling. You're trying to understand where they're coming from as best you can. That's hard for some of us. Some of us it comes easily and some it's more difficult. But be present in the situation and kind of listen for what their feelings are and their needs and their values that are underneath what the surface. They'll say things on the surface. What's going on underneath? As best as you can, try to understand where they're coming from. We live in a divided country. You know, one of the biggest things that would help us is if people who come from different cultural backgrounds would learn to talk to each other and really listen. I'm so thankful for opportunities I've had down through the years, especially when I was in Los Angeles, to have conversations with people that came from different cultures. And it challenges the way you look at things. And it should. Listen empathetically. Try to understand why they're doing what they're doing. Why they're saying what they're saying. Sometimes all a person wants is an empathetic ear. All he or she needs is to talk it out. Just offering a listening ear and an understanding heart for his or her suffering can be a big comfort. What keeps us from it? Self-absorption. If you're absorbed with yourself, you won't be a good listener. And you won't be an empathetic listener. Self-absorption in all of its forms kills empathy, let alone compassion. When we focus on ourselves, our world contracts as our problems and preoccupations loom large. But when we focus on others, our world expands. Our own problems drift to the periphery of the mind and so seem smaller, and we increase our capacity for connection or compassionate action. There's a lot of wisdom in that. What keeps us from really listening is our preoccupation with ourselves. If we empathize with that other person, we'll take the time to find out what's going on in their heart, what's going on in their life. And the last thing I'm going to say is this: listen prayerfully. Listen prayerfully, especially if you're a couple. One of the most important things you could learn to do is to pray together. Pastor Mays, the guy that I used to work with in 2 different churches, would always say that the most important thing to him in choosing elders was he wanted elders he could pray with. Because he would say, when I get a group of people that I can pray with and we regularly get together and pray, God binds our hearts together. There's a bond that takes place between us. And then we seek the Lord. And we become with one heart and one mind in a way that is almost impossible to get apart from praying together. And I think the same thing is true in marriage. When we pray together, it brings empathy. It brings closeness. It brings intimacy with each other. It's actually a difficult thing for some of us to do. But it's important. And I saw something this week that just utterly blew me away. In fact, when I first saw this, I thought, that can't be true. But here's an August 2010 issue of the Journal of Marriage and Family magazine. I went and looked it up to make sure this is true. In this study by 3 university professors who were studying marriage and ethnicity and religion and a number of issues that led to families staying together or families divorcing. Fascinating thing they found in these thousands of couples that they worked with and surveyed. And here's what it said. Couples who prayed together regularly had the lowest rate of divorce. Less than 1% of those surveyed in their study divorced. And I thought, that just seems too good to be true, doesn't it? But you can look it up, it's on the internet. Not that you can believe everything that's on the internet, but this is actually in a journal that you have to, it's a legitimate, peer-reviewed journal. Fascinating. Maybe there's anomalies in their study or something, I don't know. But what it is at least saying to us is this. If you have the ability to pray with your spouse, there's an intimacy of communication you have that says something solid about your relationship. I encourage you, pray together with those you're closest to, your spouse, your family, with other believers. As we pray together, God binds us together at a deep level. And it's not just us. He gets involved in it too. There's 3 cords here that are binding together. So here's my encouragement to you this week. Look at your life. Make some margin. You know how books have margins? And if on the edge of the page there's a white space, and if it's not there, it's hard to read. It seems like it's crowded. Well, your life feels that way too when there's no margin in it. Well, think about your life. Do you have time to listen to God? Is there margin in your life to listen to God? Is there margin in your life for fellowship with other believers? Is there margin in your life for sharing with other people who don't know Jesus? Is there margin in your life for your marriage? Really listening and communicating? Is there margin in your life for your family? Special times together. Listening to hopes and dreams and sharing even the mundane things of life, telling stories. Proverbs, one translation puts it this way: listening is the beginning of understanding, and wisdom is the reward for a lifetime of listening. Let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance. Let's pray. Lord, make us lifetime listeners. Help us to slow down our lives, to find the margin for our spouses, to talk and to pray, to communicate at a deep level, to respect and love one another, to pray with each other. For our families, help us to slow down and listen, care even about the concerns of the youngest one that we sometimes think, how could they have anything to be worried about? Oh Lord, just help us to be empathetic in our listening. Help us, Lord, to slow down enough to listen to each other. We need each other in the body of Christ. We need to tell our stories. We need to talk about our lives together. We need to encourage each other and pray for each other. Help us to slow down, Lord. Our families need it. Our marriages need it. Our lives need it. Oh, Lord, speak. Your servants are listening. Teach us. Amen. We're going to sing a song that says that very thing.